What if the fuel that powers America's industries, heats its homes, and keeps its cities running suddenly became a pawn in a high-stakes economic showdown? Canada, the United States' largest supplier of crude oil, is weighing the unthinkable, cutting oil exports in direct retaliation to President Trump's proposed 25% tariffs on Canadian goods. These tariffs, designed to protect domestic industries, could spark an energy crisis that threatens to upend decades of cross-border trade and cooperation. With Canada supplying over 3.8 million barrels of oil per day to the U.S., this move could send ripple effects through both economies, driving up energy costs and straining the historic ties between these nations. In this video, we uncover the details behind this unfolding crisis, the potential fallout, and what it means for the future of North American trade. Stay tuned. You won't want to miss this. For decades, Canada has been the backbone of America's energy supply. In July 2024 alone, the U.S. imported a staggering 4.3 million barrels of Canadian crude oil every single day, a record-breaking figure fueled by the expansion of the Trans Mountain Pipeline. This isn't just a drop in the bucket. That oil makes up nearly 24% of all crude processed in U.S. refineries, a massive jump from 17% back in 2013. America's dependency runs deep, with 99% of Canada's oil exports flowing straight to the U.S. This is more than just business. It's a lifeline. Now, imagine what happens if Canada suddenly decides to cut that supply. Gas prices could skyrocket, industries might grind to a halt, and millions of Americans could feel the squeeze at the pump and in their wallets. The U.S. may be a global superpower, but in this game of energy, Canada holds the winning hand. And for the first time in years, they're considering playing it. If Canada pulls the plug on oil exports, the ripple effects could be catastrophic. The U.S. economy, already fragile under inflationary pressures, would face a brutal energy crisis. Gasoline prices could surge past $6 per gallon, and industries reliant on oil, from transportation to manufacturing, could face crippling production costs. Trucking companies, airlines, and even farmers would feel the sting, causing a chain reaction of rising prices on everyday goods. But the damage wouldn't stop at the U.S. border. Canada exported $439.6 billion worth of goods to the U.S. in 2023, with crude petroleum alone accounting for a hefty $117 billion. Cutting off this vital trade could slam Canada's own economy, pushing it toward a recession. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce has already warned that sweeping tariffs and retaliation could trigger a Canadian economic downturn by mid-year. Inside Canada, the idea of cutting off oil exports has ignited a political firestorm. Alberta, the heart of Canada's oil industry, stands at the center of this debate. Premier Danielle Smith has voiced strong opposition to using energy exports as a bargaining chip, warning of severe consequences. She argues that such a move wouldn't just hurt the U.S., it could devastate Canada's own provinces, especially industrial hubs like Ontario and Quebec, which rely heavily on revenue from oil exports. On the other hand, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau faces mounting pressure to act decisively. Trudeau has hinted that Canada won't back down, emphasizing that any trade war with the U.S. would be met with a robust response. His administration is weighing the political risks, act too aggressively, and risk national economic fallout, or appear weak and allow Trump's tariffs to go unchallenged. This growing divide exposes a harsh truth. Canada's economic unity is cracking. Western provinces want to protect their industries, while Eastern provinces push for retaliation. The question is no longer just about oil. It's about how far Canada is willing to go in this escalating standoff. Next, we'll uncover how Trump's tariff strategy could backfire spectacularly on the U.S. But before we dive into the next part, take a moment to hit that like button, and we put our best efforts to create our every single video. If you're enjoying it, subscribe to Global Insight and support our journey to bring you more captivating stories. Now, let's keep going. Things are about to get even more exciting. Trump's aggressive tariff strategy was designed to pressure Canada, but it may be the U.S. that feels the sting first. American refineries, particularly in the Midwest and Gulf Coast, are heavily dependent on Canadian crude. With Canada supplying 24% of the crude processed in U.S. refineries, any disruption could send oil prices skyrocketing. Imagine this: refineries in Texas and Illinois scrambling to replace 4.3 million barrels of oil per day. The alternatives? Costlier and riskier imports from the Middle East or Venezuela, nations with unstable political climates. This could drive up fuel prices, hitting American consumers where it hurts most: the gas pump. Industries that rely on affordable energy, from manufacturing to transportation, would be crippled. Trucking companies, airlines, and factories would face soaring operational costs, potentially leading to layoffs and business closures. The very tariffs meant to protect American jobs might end up destroying them. Even Wall Street isn't immune. Investors are already jittery, and any sign of oil supply instability could send markets into a tailspin. Trump's plan to make America stronger through tariffs might just weaken its economic backbone. Canada's potential cut in oil exports to the U.S. wouldn't just rattle North America, it could send shockwaves through global markets. Oil is the lifeblood of the world economy, and when a major supplier like Canada shifts gears, the entire energy market feels the tremors. Global oil prices could surge overnight. Countries competing for alternative supplies would drive demand higher, pushing prices to levels not seen since past oil crises. The ripple effect would stretch far beyond gas stations. Shipping costs would spike, consumer goods would become more expensive, and inflation could spiral in economies already teetering on the edge. Emerging markets, heavily reliant on stable oil prices, might face financial turmoil. Nations in Asia and Africa, still recovering from global disruptions, could struggle with rising energy costs, slowing development projects, and increasing poverty rates. Meanwhile, oil giants like OPEC and countries like Russia could seize this chaos to tighten their grip on the global market. With the U.S. scrambling for replacements, these suppliers could dictate higher prices, knowing America has limited alternatives. And as global markets tremble, alliances could shift. Countries that once leaned on U.S. energy policies might start forging new deals with competitors, leaving the U.S. more isolated in the global energy game. While Canada weighs slashing oil exports to the U.S., the decision is far from unanimous within its own borders. The nation stands at a crossroads, with deep divisions among provinces threatening to fracture the country's response. In Alberta, the heart of Canada's oil industry, Premier Danielle Smith is raising red flags. Alberta's economy thrives on oil exports, and Smith warns that weaponizing energy could backfire. She fears crippling consequences, not for the U.S., but for Canada itself. A sudden export cut could devastate Alberta's oil sector, leading to job losses, bankruptcies, and a regional economic downturn. Meanwhile, Ontario and Quebec, Canada's industrial powerhouses, are bracing for fallout. These provinces heavily rely on affordable energy, much of which comes from Alberta. If oil exports are slashed, energy prices at home could skyrocket, squeezing industries and families alike. Manufacturing hubs in Ontario might grind to a halt, and Quebec's energy costs could spike, causing widespread discontent. On the national stage, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau faces mounting pressure. Caught between protecting Canada's economy and standing firm against U.S. tariffs, Trudeau must tread carefully. His government must balance Alberta's economic interests with national unity and international diplomacy. But beneath the political chess game, there's a growing fear. Could this internal divide weaken Canada's stance on the world stage? As whispers of Canada's oil export cuts reach Washington, the U.S. government isn't standing idle. Behind closed doors, American officials are already crafting countermoves to shield their economy from a potential energy shock. The Department of Energy is eyeing strategic oil reserves, ready to flood the market with crude to offset any supply disruptions. Simultaneously, the U.S. is quietly reaching out to other oil-rich nations, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, and even Brazil, seeking alternative suppliers to reduce dependency on Canadian oil. But it doesn't stop there. Washington is considering retaliatory trade measures of its own. Talks of slapping additional tariffs on Canadian industries like lumber, automobiles, and agriculture are gaining traction. The U.S. knows Canada's economy is deeply intertwined with theirs, and they're prepared to squeeze where it hurts. Meanwhile, American oil companies are lobbying aggressively, urging lawmakers to fast-track domestic drilling projects and pipeline expansions. Their message is clear: energy independence must be a priority. In the corridors of power, the stage is set for a high-stakes economic standoff. This conflict between Canada and the U.S. doesn't just threaten North America, it's shaking the global energy market. Oil prices are beginning to surge as traders brace for potential supply disruptions. If Canada pulls back its exports, the already fragile global oil market could tip into chaos. Europe, still recovering from energy instability, watches nervously. Countries like Germany and France, reliant on stable global oil prices, could face inflation spikes. Emerging economies, especially in Asia, might struggle even more. With oil becoming scarcer and costlier, manufacturing costs could soar, disrupting supply chains worldwide. The Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, is monitoring the crisis, weighing whether to increase production to stabilize the market or to capitalize on soaring prices. Global financial markets are rattled. Stock markets in New York, Toronto, and London show volatility, and investors are pulling back from energy-sensitive sectors. The tension between Canada and the U.S. isn't just a bilateral issue. It's a global risk with far-reaching consequences. Behind diplomatic smiles and public reassurances, both Canada and the U.S. are quietly preparing for economic war. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau faces growing pressure from domestic industries demanding protection, while President Trump remains defiant, vowing to protect American interests at any cost. The world holds its breath. The standoff between Canada and the United States teeters on the edge of collapse or compromise. In Ottawa, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau gathers with his top advisors, weighing the risks of pulling the trigger on oil export cuts. The stakes couldn't be higher. Canada's economy hangs in the balance, and the threat of a U.S. recession looms over North America. Yet, Trudeau knows one truth: Canada must stand firm or risk becoming a target for future economic aggression. In Washington, President Trump remains unapologetic. His proposed tariffs still stand, and his administration prepares for a scenario where Canadian oil no longer flows south. Strategic oil reserves are on standby, and trade negotiations with other oil producers intensify. But even Trump's closest advisors warn that escalating this conflict could backfire, plunging the U.S. economy into turmoil just months before a critical election. As markets wobble and industries brace for impact, the world wonders who will blink first. In a last-ditch effort, international allies step in. The European Union, Japan, and even China quietly pressure both nations to return to the table. Energy security is a global concern, and the ripple effects of this clash could ignite worldwide instability. Behind closed doors, negotiations resume. Words are measured. Demands are softened. Slowly, inch by inch, both sides begin to recognize the abyss they stand over. Then, in a surprising turn, a compromise emerges. The U.S. agrees to postpone the harshest tariffs, offering room for a broader trade discussion. Canada, in turn, halts plans to restrict oil exports, opting instead to diversify its energy markets beyond the U.S. Both leaders step back from the brink, but scars remain. This wasn't a victory for either side. It was a warning. The deep economic interdependence between Canada and the U.S. has been exposed as both a strength and a vulnerability. Trust has been shaken, and the world now sees how fragile even the strongest alliances can be when economic interests collide. But what if next time neither side is willing to step back? As the dust settles, one thing is certain: this energy conflict has redrawn the lines of global trade and power. The next chapter in this story could be even more volatile. So what do you think? Is this the end of economic warfare between Canada and the U.S., or just the beginning? If this story gripped you, wait until you see how new immigration rules could shake up Canada in 2025. Click here to find out how millions could be affected and what it means for the future. Don't miss out. Watch now on Global Insight.